Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
I had a whole bunch of people send me this story about the Institute for Justice and a big case, and including J. Justin Wilson, who wrote this press release. He's a young man. I met him last fall at a retreat in California, and he is, of course, a part of the organization. So, victory. Supreme Court rules that government officials cannot arrest their political opponents without consequences. Now, whenever the Supreme Court rules something that seems so painfully obvious, you kind of look at it and go, really? But they had to get that far for a reason. Somebody put up a big fight. In a warning to officials hoping to weaponize the government against political rivals, the Supreme Court approves First Amendment claims. So the Supreme Court has ruled that Americans' First Amendment rights are violated when they are arrested in retaliation for their speech. The decision opens the courthouse doors for those Americans who have been arrested for criticizing the government. Now, in this case, it's Sylvia Gonzalez. And the Institute writes, this is a great day for the First Amendment and Sylvia, who has courageously fought against retaliatory actions by government officials, says a senior attorney at the Institute for Justice. The Supreme Court's revision of its First Amendment retaliation doctrine ensures that Americans can seek justice when they have evidence of a retaliatory arrest. Retaliatory arrests undermine the very foundation of our democracy, and this ruling helps safeguard the rights of all Americans to speak out without fear of retribution. We are proud to have been part of this crucial victory for free speech. Now, Sylvia's case began back in 2019 after she was elected as a councilwoman in Castle Hills, Texas. Following her election, she led a petition to remove the city manager for mistreating employees and neglecting basic city services. This act of political speech resulted in coordinated retaliation by city officials. 2 months later, city officials falsely accused her of tampering with a government record, which led to her arrest. And among the city officials was the mayor and the police chief. After a humiliating day in jail and her mugshot splashed across local media, the district attorney dropped the charges. Despite this, the ongoing intimidation forced her to resign from the city council. So in September of 2020, she partnered with the IJ to file a federal lawsuit to vindicate her First Amendment rights. The city's attempts to dismiss the case failed in the district court, but the Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals disagreed and ruled that she failed to prove that the arrest was unequivocally retaliatory, despite clear evidence of selective prosecution. And now the Supreme Court has ruled that Sylvia's case can move forward. So keep in mind, what we're talking about here is theoreticals, because she'll still have to prove her case in the lower court. And it'll be up to a jury to decide, most likely. However, if she can prove her case, she can win. And the court was saying, no, she doesn't even get a trial because she can't possibly prove that. And so, how would you prove something was unequivocally retaliatory? Well, you kind of look at the situation, the facts, and circumstances. Oh, that doesn't sound unequivocal, though, does it? And so that was a standard that was a little bit too high. The fight was always about more than just me, she says. No one should have to go through what I went through. With this decision, I'm confident it won't happen again. She continues, this has been a nightmare for the last 5 years. It's kept me up at night. But finally, I can sleep knowing the nightmare I've gone through will protect critics from retaliation in the future. The court explained that the Fifth Circuit thought that she had to provide very specific comparator evidence. That is, examples of identifiable people who mishandled a government petition in the exact same way that they accused her of, but were not arrested. Now, although there is an exception, and it's quite slim, the demand for virtually identical and identifiable comparators goes too far. Plaintiffs like Sylvia may proceed with evidence that makes it more likely that an officer has declined to arrest somebody for engaging in the same kind of conduct in the past. And this sounds a lot like that qualified immunity argument. Well, how did they know it was wrong? Can you point to a previous case where they were told it was wrong? And so here it's kind of like, okay, you did this and you got arrested. And everybody thinks that arrest was a direct result of what you did. Can you find other examples of people who did exactly what you did who were not arrested in the same time frame by the same people? And by the way, you understand that following that logic, It gives everybody a free shot if that were the law of the land. Because if that were the law of the land, then the first time somebody does it, they go, well, you have no examples, do you? Okay. As the IJ's research suggests, retaliation such as that experienced by Sylvia is a bigger problem than Americans probably realize. IJ's unaccountable report found that among federal appeals where officials claimed qualified immunity, alleged violations of First Amendment rights were surprisingly common, and most often they involved retaliation by government officials against citizens engaging in protected speech or activity. The Institute for Justice launched the project on immunity and accountability to tear down barriers between everyday people and their constitutional rights. And that's the president, Chief Counsel Scott Bullock speaking. I've also met him. He's a nice guy and a great attorney. With today's Supreme Court victory in Sylvia's case, there is now one less barrier than there was yesterday. The Institute for Justice will continue to litigate Sylvia's case as it continues to move forward. And so I would suspect there's a good chance it'll settle now, but we'll see what happens. They might not. They might want to take that one up and try it and see what happens. Of course, that's always a sentence that precedes trouble. Try it and see what happens. But, keep in mind you have a First Amendment right to speak. And that's been broadly interpreted, not just your ability to speak and just, sit there and talk to your friends, but you can also, go stand outside and speak and talk to strangers. You go to city council meetings and speak, and there's all kinds of things that you can do. And your ability to speak in America is one of the cornerstones of our democracy, because we work on this theory that we have a government and everybody gets to participate in how the government gets elected and so on, right? Okay. And so one way you participate is you get to vote. Okay, you get to go and vote. If you're, if you're old enough, go and vote. Of course, that's just one way you can participate. You can talk to your friends. You can go on Facebook and post memes and say, hey, I don't like this candidate, I like that candidate. Or a meme that says, my cat likes this candidate. My bike likes Ike. Whatever it is, you have the right to say these things. But here, she's on the city council, and she's working with somebody who's got a petition, and your right to petition the government. Let me see. Now, if I was to go look for that in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, where would I find it? Oh, right next to the free speech thing. In fact, it's in the same amendment. Your right to petition the government. So if she's an elected official helping people petition the government for something they're allowed to do, that is certainly a protected activity. And if that's why they arrested her, then you got a problem. And now, of course, like I said before, she's got to prove it. She's got to prove it, go to trial, prove it, see what happens. But the allegation is there, and she should be allowed to make the allegation, and a jury should be allowed to rule on it. And that's what the Supreme Court just said. And so every now and then I come out here and talk about courts ruling on things and the laws as they're written and so on. And I have people who say, but Steve, I disagree with this or I disagree with that. And I go, great, you're allowed to disagree. Our ability to disagree is also part of our free speech, right? Except when the U.S. Supreme Court rules on something, that is the final say on it. Now, you can say you disagree with the Supreme Court. I've disagreed with them in the past a couple times. I can think of one or two cases where I've disagreed with the Supreme Court. I remember in law school reading these cases going, what? I didn't know any of this before I went to law school. But you have to understand that you can disagree all you want, but you should understand the way things are. And so now the Supreme Court has said that people who raise these allegations will have a slightly easier time pursuing the allegations. And they won't get tossed so easily by the trial courts who say, oh, you can't find an exact situation like yours where somebody didn't get arrested. You're done. No, that's not what it is anymore. So they had to go to the Supreme Court to get the ruling. They got the ruling. And as I always tell you with the Institute for Justice, is they are an organization, they're a nonprofit, and they survive entirely on the generosity of people like you and me who support them. So if you can, support them. Anything you send them is useful. And even if you can't support them, bookmark their page and visit it. Subscribe to their newsletter, whatever you got to do. But follow the stuff they do. It's such important work that they do that I'm not sure there's anybody else that ever come out so in favor of on my channel. And I've got a pretty decent sized audience. And I'm here talking about them because I admire them and their work so much. So like I said, I've met Scott Bullock, I've met J. Justin Wilson, who wrote this press release. They do wonderful work. It's a great organization, so support them if you can. I'll put a link to them in the description below the video. But it's a victory, as the Supreme Court rules that government officials cannot arrest their political opponents without consequences. And again, the fact the Supreme Court had to rule on that does seem a bit much. But there you go. They did the right thing. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law.
The less you respond to negative people, the more positive your life will become.